Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Matt from Matt's Bookshelf, and today I am doing my best books of 2023. Like what I did last year, I'm going to go through the books that I loved from 2023, not exactly in ranked order until my final three, which I'll call my Holy Trinity of 2023. Last year, I read some amazing books, and I can't wait to share with you the books that I loved. I did not get a chance to talk about on my BookTube channel. So the first great book I read in 2023 was in January, and that was Yevgeny Onegin by Alexander Pushkin. I apologize for the pronunciation. It is a comedy epic poem of sorts about Yevgeny Onegin, a very selfish aristocrat, as he almost finds love that ends in like a hilarious tragedy. And Alexander Pushkin is one of those exceptionally talented writers whose humor transcends both language barrier and time barrier. I sort of cringe sometimes when a reader from today says like, "Oh, this book from 500 years ago was hilarious." But this book, although not 500 years ago, is legitimately hilarious. The narrator is so funny. The characters all have like this hilarious, like absurdity, somewhat akin to like a Yorgos Lanthimos film from my perspective. There's an absurdity to it that just transcends time, and I still remember most of the jokes, especially one where the narrator obsesses over girls' feet too much and then apologizes for it later on. It's just a really great book that I can't wait to reread again someday because it's also a breeze to read. The next great book I read was Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. As you might know from my Crime and Punishment video, I did not particularly like my first round with Dostoevsky. I loved the first and final parts of Crime and Punishment, but I found the middle to be tedious, even though someone's going, "What's the point? It's supposed to be tedious." Well, I found it to be too tedious and too overwritten. However, Notes from Underground, which follows a man who has just accepted he's not mentally equipped or emotionally equipped for real life and decides to completely isolate himself from the real world and then tracks his life in order and to show how he got to this state. And I found Dostoevsky with a shorter word count to be way more effective. I think the psychology in this book is really exceptional, and it's a book where I think everyone deals with the feeling that they don't belong in society at least a couple times in their lives. This character feels it all the time, and just like the mood swings he goes on, all feel so fitting for him. Like there's always this little glimpse of hope, and then he ruins it for himself. And I found it to be really tragic, but the character's also relatable despite the fact that if you met him in real life, you would probably hate him and not feel bad for him. I also read Contact by Carl Sagan. I need to read more science fiction, and Carl Sagan is, of course, one of the most brilliant scientists of our generation, probably of all time as well, and this is his only go at creative fiction. And having read the book, it's kind of sad, because I think it's really, really effective. Contact follows an attempt to make contact with alien life forms, and it follows Ellie Arroway, who is this young American scientist working with the world's best to make a ship and to potentially cross dimensions in order to make contact with an alien species that he thinks is reaching out to them. And Carl Sagan does such a great job, not only of the science aspect of it, but the philosophical aspects where he debates science with religious figures. And it's not so much the religious figures, though they have flawed views, they're not necessarily used as punching bags. And just like the world politics of this, the sociological politics of what it would be like to actually potentially make contact with aliens creates a really brilliant book with multiple angles to view it, and makes me wish that Carl Sagan had written more creative fiction. I should really read his nonfiction as well, but as it stands right now, I loved Contact, and it's motivating me to read more science fiction. Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. I went to Edinburgh over the summer. I went all around Scotland, and what books I'll be reading later on will explain the other places that I went to. I got this book because it was signed, and it was only like it's only like £10, and it was signed by the author herself. I actually went up to the bookstore clerk, and I was like, "Is this still £10 if it's signed?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's still £10." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna buy it." This is the only horror book on this list. In fact, it's one of the few horror books that I've read in my life. Again, it's short, but it's effective. There's this Lovecraftian element to it, as it tracks like the fall of a relationship between two women. I believe they're married. Like one is more of a homebody, the other is a scientist who goes on this deep sea expedition that goes wrong, and it tracks her expedition as well as her return home from the perspective of her wife trying to figure out what exactly went wrong with her. The ending is a little cliche. It's satisfying, I would say. But the actual writing and the actual character development here, I think, is really great. And the way that this mystery is teased out throughout the length of the novel. Again, it's not too long. So there are times where you're like, oh, you're about to reveal something. But then you like kind of like chicken out of it. But again, it's a fairly short and effective read. So it didn't particularly bother me. Next up on books that reference where I've been traveling to over the summer, Havoc by Tom Christensen, Danish novel. Tom Christensen was very inspired by James Joyce. It follows Old Jestero, who is a literary critic, kind of a hack, also an alcoholic, and this book tracks his descension into full alcoholism as he just sort of neglects all of his duty and all of his love in his life and just falls for demon rum and meets some very shady figures along the way. Next up on the Copenhagen Danish-themed novels, I have Tove Ditlevsen's Copenhagen Trilogy, the memoirs of famous and esteemed Danish writer Tove Ditlevsen, mainly taking place as Nazi occupation comes and oppresses Denmark and Copenhagen at the time. This is probably the book that is most synonymous with Copenhagen. Tove was an incredibly successful writer while she was alive, and to this day is still very well known, which makes the events of this book so tragic because despite her fame and her talent, she was still abused and taken advantage of. She eventually gets involved with the wrong people, especially a doctor who keeps giving her drugs that she really doesn't need. And especially in like the last part of the memoir, she just tracks the hopelessness and like the self-imposed mental prison of being so hopelessly addicted to painkillers and drugs so well. Part of the tragedy around this book is the fact that Tove does not get better. She eventually dies from a drug overdose, I believe. But that being said, there is still some fun to have. She still manages to find some fun in her life and some enjoyment. But overall, it's just a very effective read and character study. I also have The American Brutus by Michael Kaufman, a giant book that can tell you everything you want to know about John Wilkes Booth up to his bathroom schedule. What is really surprising about this book was who inspired John Wilkes Booth. The abolitionist James Brown, who philosophically and ideologically was completely against everything John Wilkes Booth stood for, was a huge inspiration for John Wilkes Booth to use extreme violence to get what he wanted, to push what he believed in, which was to kill the president in order to preserve the Confederate States. It also paints a picture of John Wilkes Booth as a man who is both incredibly intelligent and incredibly short-sighted. Intelligent in the fact that he was able to bring all these people together, but also at the same time not really thinking of the consequences of his actions at the same time, to a certain extent. Very effective book. Some really great details, especially with the characters surrounding John Wilkes Booth. Another great detail was that how little security the president had at the time. There are stories of Abraham Lincoln with all of his chief advisors all in a room, and some random person just walks in and says, "Oh, you're Abraham Lincoln?" That's how little security he had during the Civil War, which is insane. But great book. As someone who wants to learn more about American history, Civil War time, American West, this was really what I wanted. So this is what I wanted. I also have Custer, The Controversial Life of George Armstrong Custer by Jeffrey Wright. I bought this book on a whim, and I loved it. I think it's a really effective book. I want to learn more about the Native American War, U.S. expansion, and this book provided exactly what I wanted, going into detail about what battles between Union Army versus Native Americans, like what battles between the Union Army and Confederacy were like, how George Custer was unique in his ability to fearlessly lead himself, do exactly what he instructed his cavalry to do. If they were going to go charging the front lines, you better believe Custer was going to be in the front lines. He, again, kind of like John Wilkes Booth to a certain extent, really intelligent in some regards, short-sighted in other regards. I think Jeffrey Wright does a great job of describing battles, especially when we get to the Native American Western expansion wars. The way he's able to describe how battles took place, the brutality of the battles, not necessarily just Little Bighorn, but just even the smaller skirmishes as well, were very effectively done. And also Custer's relationship with his wife, Libby Bacon, it's like something out of a romance novel, how much they seem to sincerely love each other. just a great character study. It's more of a broad book, I would say. If I wanted, I think it's like a good like way to dip your toe, at least for me, into Custer, into Little Bighorn, and into the Western expansion of the U.S. But the best thing I can say about the book is that it made me hungry to learn more. And Jeffrey Wart's prose is really effective. And I think that although it probably could have gone more in depth into some regards of Custer's life, it does an excellent job of giving you little accounts from different soldiers seeing Custer. So you have like 2 paragraphs. And the way he seamlessly weaves between different perspectives of people watching Custer in the battle, their accounts of it, gives you a very broad sense of how people felt about Custer. And it portrays the good and the bad alike. After the Civil War, he proved to be a very ineffectual leader during times of peace. He had very little tolerance for problems, and it caused resentment among his men. And also Little Bighorn being one of the greatest failures in U.S. military history. Really great book. I highly recommend it. The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. I think I said in the books I must read by the end of 2023 video that I'm not a big Tolkien fan. I adore Lord of the Rings. I think it has problems. I don't like The Hobbit. But not most people who thinks that Tolkien is above criticism, which is probably going to be heresy for some people watching this video. However, as someone who's not big into lore in fantasy, I like characters more. I like how characters react to epic environments rather than going into like the nitty-gritty of every aspect of a fantasy world. I really enjoyed The Silmarillion way more than I expected to. This book is epic. Like, there are characters that have only like a page of background before they get into their battles, but you care about them for some reason because Tolkien just manages to set stages so well. It's just a very effective book. I would probably rank it. I think it's way better than The Hobbit. I think it's better than Fellowship. It's probably only Return of the King is, I mean, granted, Lord of the Rings, Tolkien is just one big book, but if I was going to split them up into 3 books, I would say Return of the King is the only book I think is better from Tolkien's resume than The Silmarillion. Just really refined and very to the point to a certain extent. And, the Luthien Baron romance is amazing. The battles are so brutal. So brutal. It's kind of funny that he wrote The Hobbit as like the first dip into Middle Earth, considering that he already knew like all the background and how brutal this world is going to be. But yes, if you're not a big Tolkien fan, I would still recommend just go into this book wanting to read great prose and wanting to read epic battles and epic mythological tales, because I went in with that lens and I highly, highly enjoyed it. Goodbye to All That by Robert Graves. I'll be getting more into Robert Graves later on in this video. Goodbye to All That is his memoirs, autobiographical memoir from like his birth to around age 35, I believe. And first of all, the descriptions of World War I are great. There's a little detail where they're saying like that snipers always knew who officers were because they had weaker knees, like thinner knees. I was like, well, that's a crazy detail. He's very smart. I'll be talking about I, Claudius later. You can tell that Robert Graves as a person really relates to the character of I, Claudius, because writing I, Claudius essentially has the same tone as Goodbye to All That. Very effective autobiography. Robert Graves is probably the most readable writer I've ever experienced so far in my life. You can just devour these books. Again, you look at it and you're like, there's a lot of writing on these pages, but then it just flies by. Really great, really, really dry and funny, and Robert Graves is just a very intelligent person. And the ending where he wraps up all this stuff, he's like, I wouldn't change a thing. Loved it. And as someone who is a writer and is fascinated by the ancient world, he just says things sometimes that I'm like, that's exactly how I feel. How did you know that? This is funny things like that. So Goodbye to All That is amazing. And now it's time to get into the Holy Trinity of 2023. These will not be in any order of how I liked them, but these are the top 3 books that I read in 2023. First off, Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. I gave this book a second go because of Steve Donahue's book club. I read this last year and I read it in 2022, did not enjoy it. I reread it again and my God, I was so wrong about this book. The prose took me a full reread to actually appreciate, but on that second read, it was just great. All the dry commentary, all the subtle character building, all the subtle world building, there are scenes, I read this in March, and there are still scenes that just are so shocking to me that have the emotion of those scenes have not left me. It is a great book, a great work of historical fiction, and my only advice is to not be stubborn as me in the first read through and just fully give yourself over to this book. Next up, I have The Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon. I already did a video on it. I'm already fully into my Project Pynchon series. I read V, did not enjoy it. I was very skeptical going into The Crying of Lot 49, and I loved it. I think that everything that Pynchon fans like from his work, now I can see and appreciate. I'm currently reading Gravity's Rainbow. I'm about a third of the way through that, so I will be doing a video on Gravity's Rainbow as well. But the ending specifically of The Crying of Lot 49 and also the world building of Saint Narcissus are just so impactful, and especially the last couple paragraphs of The Crying of Lot 49, just the emotion of it have stuck with me since reading it. I think it is a brilliant novella, maybe one of the best novellas I've ever read, if not the best novella I've ever read. Very good, and can't wait to read more Pynchon. And finally, probably the best book. I know I said that the Holy Trinity isn't ranked, but I would say the best book I read in 2023 was I, Claudius by Robert Graves. Love ancient Rome. I went in this book just to see what would happen, and the first 100 pages are kind of rough, especially because I know the history. And so I was like, okay, is this going to be just a retread on ground that we've already gone through, that I already know about? And no, it's not. This book is so brilliant and funny. I also read Claudius the God. It is very good. It would also be on this list as well. But I, Claudius is just such a complete novel. I did a video on that as well, so if you want my full thoughts on it. But the way that each emperor's reign leading up to Claudius's accession to the throne is so great. Each one feels distinct. Augustus, Tiberius, and Caligula's reigns all feel distinct from a narrative standpoint, from a tonal standpoint, and just has a great ending as well. And Claudius's humor is present. It's of course Robert Graves' humor as well, and couple issues which I address in my review. Not a review, it's just a video on it. But Claudius is the best book read in 2023, and Robert Graves is becoming one of the best writers I've ever read. And I have so many other books now, so you'll probably expect more Robert Graves on my best of 2024 list. So that's my video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I enjoyed making it. I'm sorry it came out late. I was very busy in December. So yes, you get a late best of 2024 list. As for videos to expect in the future, Gravity's Rainbow absolutely is coming up. I might do a Reading Goals of 2024 video. I think I kind of missed that window for that, but just expect more discussions on AuthorTube, BookTube, all that stuff. My video count has gone down a bit since like September, but I will continue to be making videos. I don't really want to stop, just probably not as much of a output as I used to have. So let me know what your favorite books of 2024 are. Let me know what your favorite books of 2023 are, because we're in 2024 somehow. And let me know what your reading goals are and what your best books you read in 2023 are. And if you read the books that I read and if you agree with me. So other than that, I will hopefully see you in the next video. Thank you and goodbye.